Okay, these are my top 10 Metroid games. I've basically played them all. I'll get into that more in detail later, but I haven't really finished the original Metroid 2 on the Game Boy, but I've played another Metroid 2 remake, which is very similar, and I did play it for like an hour or something a couple of times. So, I know what Metroid 2 is like, so I can basically rank it. I'll get into that more later, but I basically combine it with another Metroid 2 remake because I don't think my opinion really differs on it. I've also played Samus Returns, of course. So yeah, I did play Metroid 2. Okay, so other than that, I played everything. I watched a Let's Play of Federation Force because honestly, I didn't really think it was fun to play. So, well, let's start there. Actually, at number 14 is Metroid Prime Federation Force. Obviously, it's not really all that great. For me, it's more that it's just not really for me. It's just I don't really like co-op games. I've never really enjoyed that. I always just like playing competitive multiplayer games or whatever, or party games or just single player. I never really enjoy co-op games, so I didn't really get into it. You know, with Zelda, you have Zelda Triforce Heroes and Four Swords and everything, and I also just don't enjoy that. And I think Federation Force is basically just as good as any of those games, so it's not a bad game at all, but not my thing. Then at number 13, I have Metroid, the original on the Nintendo, the NES, and honestly, it's very good for its time, and I did enjoy it a lot. But I had to use a guide because there's no map. It's hard to navigate, and I had to use save states because the game is not very fair about regenerating health. So besides those complaints, it's actually really good, and I did enjoy myself a lot. I considered putting it higher, but I basically asked myself, would I want to play it right now over any other game? And maybe not so much. I do like the atmosphere and the music, and the level design is pretty good, even though it's hard to navigate. And obviously, Zero Mission, the remake, is higher on this list. But I thought the original Metroid was a bit more open, and I do appreciate that. I wish someday they would, or let's say like that. I wish the guy who made another Metroid remake, who made a very faithful remake to Metro 2. I wish he would make a remake to Metroid on the NES and make it like more open and stuff like original Metroid, which is not necessarily what Metro 2 did, but Metro 2 was more modern, I would say. So, yeah. Number 12, I have Metroid Fusion. It's probably really low on the list to a lot of people. I played it very recently. I played it right before Metroid Dread came out because I just kept procrastinating it and kept waiting to play Fusion or kept waiting to finish it more, I should say, because I started it like a few years ago and I only finished it recently. I do really enjoy it. I really like it. Every Metroid game is very good. I should say that I don't have really issues with any Metroid game. They're all great. Metroid Fusion to me is just you get chased by the SAX a lot, which is not really my thing. I don't really. I mean, it was cool to have like the tension of being chased and stuff like that, and all the levels were really like lab themed, which is not really my thing either. I really enjoy from the other games where like the planets are really vibrant and variant, and there's a lot of nature and stuff like that. And this was all just like very lab themed, and I don't know about that, but it was really cool. The bosses were really hard, like probably the hardest bosses in the entire franchise. And so the action and the story and the combat and everything, that was great, and that's what made this game great. But yeah, it's on number 12. Number 11, I have Metroid Prime Pinball. It's not high or anything, but it's at number 11, and because I do really enjoy it. It's probably my favorite pinball game that's out there because it's so Metroid themed. I like that the game had a Rumble pack with it, so you had Rumble with the game, and there's all types of music from Metroid in it, and you have to sort of defeat enemies and bosses with levels. I haven't played it for like days or whatever, but I did play around with it, so I don't know everything about it, but I enjoyed it a lot, and I should play it more. I bought it like way down the line, like whenever the 3DS was already way out. Oh, that's actually something I should mention. I'm a fairly new Metroid fan. I started in, I think it was about 2014 or something like that, which is like 7 years ago. I think that's about right. I tried Metroid Prime, then couldn't really get into it. Then I played Other M, and that was like an easy game to begin with. Then I played the Metroid Prime trilogy, which was a lot better than the GameCube version of Metroid Prime. So then I got really into it when I played the Prime games. And then like in between I played the 2D Metroid games. So, that's also why, Fusion and Metroid on the NES are pretty low on my list, and also why Prime Pinball, why I don't have like a huge opinion on it, because I haven't played it that much, because, I played it way down the line. Anyway, Metroid Prime Pinball on 11. Then Metroid Prime Hunters on 10. I really enjoyed it. It was basically just a full Metroid Prime game on a handheld system, which was really cool. Again, I played this, later down the line, so it felt really dated, to be honest. But I really liked controlling the camera and everything with the stylus. And I also thought the button aiming, which I sometimes used, was also pretty decent, especially because you can lock onto enemies and stuff, so it was decent. I thought the level design and the music and atmosphere was pretty much spot on with, regular Metro Prime games. I did get stuck a lot, I remember that. And I remember having to come back to a lot of areas in a not so fun way. Usually backtracking is a lot of fun in Metroid games, but I don't know if I enjoyed all the backtracking in Metroid Prime Hunters. And it was a confusing game. There was a lot of escape sequences and a lot of mini, those hunters you had to hunt down pretty often, which got repetitive. It was like a repetitive game. It felt like they were restricted to make it on the DS and couldn't go all out like they wanted, so they had to like fill it up a bit. But overall, it was still a Metroid Prime game, and I love those games. But it was the weakest one, or I guess if you count Metroid Prime Federation Force and Pinball, then those are. But yeah, you know what I mean. Then at number 9, I have Metro Dread, which, it just came out, and I would say it's like the best playing Metroid. Probably it's the newest Metroid, so you'd think I would put it very high on the list. And also, I mentioned before, I'm a very new Metroid fan, so you'd think I really enjoy this one. And I did, it's in the top 10, but I had some problems with it. It was also that it was lab themed, like in Metro Fusion. It's a new planet, but it was all in a lab style. It wasn't very overgrown green and stuff. It was very just in a lab, and I wouldn't say it was even as pretty and varied as Samus Returns. Samus Returns is higher on the list. Obviously, Samus Returns is just a remake, but it felt like a totally new game, and it was like an actual planet, and it had great environments, very pretty. I thought the 3D effect on the 3DS was as pretty as it was. It had the prettiest 3D effect on any 3DS game. So weirdly enough, Dread is in HD. Yet I think it is less pretty than Samus Returns. Not very many people will probably share that opinion with me, but yeah, it's how I see it. It's not that pretty compared to Samus Returns. It also, the thing is that it uses gameplay elements from Samus Returns, so the game didn't feel as fresh. Samus Returns had a lot of new mechanics like the melee counter and the 360-degree aiming, all stuff like that, and the gameplay was really tight, and it had a 3D engine for the first time with the 2D game, or I guess the second one after Other M, if you count that one. So yeah, Dread was kind of like Samus Returns again to me, which, if Samus Returns never happened, then I maybe would have been way higher on Dread, but yeah, it is what it is. Yeah, and the thing is, I see a lot of people saying that like they're so happy with a new Metroid game, like we waited 20 years for the Metroid 5 sequel to Metroid 4, and it's like the last one came out in 2010, basically, if I'm correct. Yeah, if you don't count Federation Force and then Samus Returns, which is a remake, if you don't count those ones, then I'm pretty sure Other M was the last one. So, I understand why people are very happy, and I am too. It was awesome to have a new Metroid game. I really enjoyed Metroid Dread, but I also felt like Samus Returns in 2017 was just a new Metroid game. It felt like a new Metroid game, and I had played another Metroid 2 remake right before it, so I did basically play the same game in a row, yet it still felt like a new game, Samus Returns. So I don't really share that opinion that I'm like super happy that Metroid is finally back, because it was back 4 years ago. Those Shine Spark abilities, they're a bit of a struggle. It's hard to pull off, and the puzzles are way harder than they ever were, in my opinion. Other than that, it was fun to use the Shine Spark, though, I would say. There's a lot of buttons to remember, a lot of abilities, a lot of buttons. It's very similar to Fusion and Other M, I would say, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but I don't generally like the lab theme and that stuff. The map design is a little clunky and confusing. The enemies are annoying and they interrupt the exploration and atmosphere. I feel like, it's the same what I said earlier with Metroid Fusion, that being chased is not like super fun to me. I just want to explore. But then the things I did like, the bosses were amazing, the gameplay was solid, it was a long game, but it was not like too long. There wasn't any filler, I would say. Puzzles and collectibles were great, even if they are, struggle sometimes. It was doable to collect everything. I did collect everything. There were some things, like a couple of things that I had to use a guide for because they, with the Shine Spark puzzles mostly, that I was super confused with it. But yeah, I appreciate that everything was doable to collect because some Metroid games I didn't even bother to even come close because they were like hidden in walls that you had no idea what were there. Now in Seven's Returns and Dread, they do a good job of making sure that you are able to collect everything. So that's a very good thing. And the thing with the collectibles is that most is listed on the map, so it's not about like finding it. It's more the challenge to do it. And I think that's a very good thing. Yeah, like I said, with Super Metroid and everything, collectibles were hidden in the wall, and it wasn't a challenge more so than it was being lucky to find it. And I really appreciate that they decided to make it challenging rather than obscure. Abilities are fun, very fun. I really like the cloak ability to make you invisible with the enemies. I really like the dash move that sort of replaced the morph ball in the beginning. I like how the shine spark worked, even though I had some complaints with it. I really like the dash move in the air, where you can evade attacks. And it seemed like every older attack was just like upgraded. The grapple beam worked very well and stuff like that. It was super challenging, like one of the most challenging Metroid games. Normally, you'd say that older games, like on the Super Nintendo, are way harder. I would probably say that Metroid Dread is a lot harder than Super Metroid was. Maybe I should play it again and fact check that, but I kind of feel like Metroid Dread was more challenging, maybe in a modern and more fair way. Super Metroid was maybe more outdated and clunky, but they purposely made bosses really hard and stuff and had a lot of difficult patterns. So yeah, Metroid Dread was one of the most hardest Metroid games. The story was fun and engaging, I would say. There were some plot twists, there was a lot of lore, and I really enjoyed how they finished it and everything. The enemies, especially at the beginning, were really fun and scary. So, those were all my negatives and positives. Yeah, Metroid Dread at number 9. Then at number 8, I have Metroid 2 and another Metroid 2 remake. I counted them together because basically to me, another Metroid 2 remake is a fan remake. It's not an official game, so I can't really count it. And also, it's just really spot on a remake of Metroid 2. Like I said before, I played a bit of the original Metroid 2, and I thought it was just really similar to AM2R. It kind of made me feel like I shouldn't even bother because it's so similar. I feel like I've played enough to know that I would enjoy Metroid 2 just as much as another Metroid 2 remake, except that it doesn't have a map and it's a bit clunky and outdated. But I prefer it so much over the original Metroid, so it is deserved at number 8, I would say. I really liked that you had to hunt down Metroids. I really liked the creepy atmospheric music. The gameplay was very good, especially for a Game Boy game, and in the AM2R2, I really enjoyed it. I like that they implemented story, sort of, with the whole Baby Metroid thing. It kind of created the Metroid story from the 5 major Metroid games. It created the story there, basically. Like, Metroid on the NES didn't add that much. It really started with the whole Baby Metroid thing. So, then at number 7, I have Metroid Prime 2. It feels sort of low for me because I really, really love the Metroid Prime games. But I don't know, this one, it was really hard and challenging, which is a good thing, but it made it feel like annoying and repetitive sometimes. And I didn't love the Dark World aspect, where it basically felt like you had to do everything twice, but in a more annoying way. It kind of felt like filler, if I'm honest. And it's like the pinnacle of Metroid Prime challenge. Metroid Prime, it set the bar and it was like decently hard, not very super hard or anything. And then Metroid Prime 2, it was really hard. But then they made the third game on the Wii, which was a lot easier, like probably easier than the first Metroid Prime. So it just feels kind of wrong to have the hardest game be in the middle for me. I don't know. It felt weird to play. Like, I expected the third game to be very hard and not the second game. I would even go as far as say that if I ever replay them, I would probably play the first Metroid Prime first and then Metroid Prime 3 and then 2. just because it makes more sense that way with challenge. There's not too much story in it, but the story will be. I know the story though, so it's okay. But yeah, Metroid Prime 2 is just a little challenging, a little repetitive, uh, but it does everything great that the first Metroid Prime did too. So it's still in the top seven. It's really good. Number six, I have Metroid Zero Mission, which I talked about the original Metroid game, which was really great, atmospheric and stuff, but outdated. I do think Metroid Zero Mission did a lot of things better because it made it more playable, had decent health regeneration. It had a map, it had logical backtracking. But also it felt similar to Super Metroid. So Super Metroid in a way was sort of like a Metroid One remake. It was on the same planet and everything, on Planet Zebes and again in Green Star and everything. So Zero Mission in a way felt like Metroid, Super Metroid 2. But that's okay. I really enjoyed both games, so that's cool with me. Number five, I have Metroid Samus Returns, which I'm surprising myself a bit with because AM2R and Metroid 2 are a bit lower on the list. And also, it's just funny because I barely recognize Metroid 2 in Samus Returns. Like, it feels like a completely new game. But, I felt like the backtracking was a bit better and it was just more modern. 3D effect is beautiful. I talked about that a bit before. It has the best 3D effect of any 3DS game, in my opinion, and it makes it look like it's an HD game. And it feels so similar to, like, Metroid Prime, but in 2D, like the atmosphere and the sounds and everything. So yeah, it's the best version of Metroid 2, even though I barely recognize it. Then at number four, I have Metroid Other M, which, to a lot of people is probably way too high, but I really love it. I really like the story, even though a lot of people don't. I like that they gave Samus a personality. Everybody has this idea that Samus is this cold-blooded badass, and she still is. But it's okay to give her like a bit of a personality in another game, in my opinion. And they did that in another end. And she was scared a couple of times, but she overcame it, and I think that's really something beautiful. And I thought the bosses were really fun and good and challenging. I thought the gameplay was really good because it's like it plays like a 2D game, but in a 3D environment. They nailed that. They did so well, and I thought it was very action packed, and they still kind of play. Samus Returns and Metroid Dread still kind of play similar to that. I thought the game was very lab themed, just like in Fusion and Dread, but it had the most variety still. It had like an overgrown setting. It had like a hot lava section. It really gave more backstory to what happened between Super Metroid and Fusion 2. Yeah, I just really like it. Then at number three, I have Metroid Prime 3, which to me it's the second best Metroid Prime game, and it's because they added a lot of quality of life to it. Like there were clear sections on the map that highlighted that there's a secret item there. I really appreciated that. So I was able to 100% complete the game. So that was really nice. The motion controls were perfected in it, and it set the bar for the trilogy version. I really enjoyed going from planet to planet, which they later did in Hunters 2. And they did it pretty well there too. But Metroid Prime 3 did it first, The going from planet to planet was really fun. It made it so the individual areas could be larger and more in depth, and there could be more variety because you're going from planet to planet. I really enjoyed that, especially because, like I complained before about some games having a lab theme and it becoming pretty boring quickly. Well, Metroid Prime 3 had like a bunch of totally different planets, so I really enjoyed that. The music was great, the atmosphere and environment. There was story in it, the voice acting. I really liked that. Really enjoyed it. The bosses were great. I really enjoyed that locking on to enemies wasn't necessarily an automatic hit. You still had to aim, so it made the motion controls all the more fun to use. And it was just the best Metroid Prime gameplay. Then at number two, I have Super Metroid, which I said before, I'm a fairly new Metroid fan. 7 years ago or something like that, I started with playing Metroid. And it's kind of interesting to have Super Metroid that high. I would say it's my favorite Super Nintendo game, my favorite 2D platformer ever, probably too. I would say that. And it's because the atmosphere and the environments were perfect. I just still haven't really felt like any other 2D Metroid has come close to Super Metroid. Like it's such a difference. Well, Samus Returns actually it came pretty close to nailing that feeling because even though that was on another planet, it was similar to Super Metroid. But yeah, Super Metroid the gameplay was really good for its time, especially. I mean, some people say it's pretty clunky, and I guess I get that. I'm pretty sure actually now that I think about it that I played Other M, which was sort of like a 2D Metroid game, then Metroid Prime 1. And I think that's when I started to play Super Metroid. Like, I just wanted to play a 2D Metroid game in between. And I could be wrong with how I played it, but I'm pretty sure I played Zero Mission after that. I just wanted to start with, like, the oldest one. And I think that was a good choice on my part because I wasn't really annoyed with how outdated it was compared to Zero Mission or whatever. I barely noticed it, to be honest. But yeah, the abilities were fun, the atmosphere was fun, the combat was good, and the level design hasn't been as good as in Super Metroid. It's just the best 2D Metroid game in my opinion. And then at number one, Metroid Prime. When I played Metroid Prime for the first time, it clicked pretty quickly. Like the environments are so pretty, and the music is. Oh, I love these synths and samples they use in Metroid Prime. It's beautiful. Like the music is everything to me in Metroid Prime, and they really nailed it. And there's so many diverse environments. I really enjoy the scanning, even though honestly, when I first played Metroid Prime, I just did the necessary scanning, and then I didn't really start scanning until Prime 2 and 3. And then I really enjoyed the scanning in those games. So if I ever go back to Metroid Prime 1, I'm definitely really going to enjoy the scanning. I would say I didn't love that there were these artifacts that you had to collect at the end of the game. It's pretty similar to like the Triforce quest in Zelda The Wind Waker. Um, it just feels like filler, and it's like I've seen everything of the world. I'm ready to end the game. Now I have to backtrack again, and I don't really know exactly where it is. Next time I'm going to play Metroid Prime, I'm probably not going to backtrack as much until the artifact section, because then I'll find it along the way because I'm backtracking. I think if you play it like that, then it's a 10 out of 10. Which I mean it still is. It's a perfect game. If you ask me how would I like my Metroid game, I would say Metroid Prime or Super Metroid, but yeah, Metroid Prime, the first one. And it's funny because I said it before. I played the original Metroid Prime. Um, I mean, I emulated it on Dolphin on my PC, but I played the GameCube version, and it had a totally different feel in when it wasn't in widescreen, and it didn't have motion controls. And the scanning was especially clunky. Like you had a scanning menu, and then you could scan things where it wasn't really clear. But then in the trilogy version, everything that you hadn't scanned was like sort of clear and bluish or something, and you would know that you hadn't scanned it. And everything improved in the trilogy version. To me, it's just the perfect Metroid game. And honestly, when I played it, I was so caught up in it that at times I was so immersed and I forgot sort of that I was playing in a game. And that's really an amazing feeling that I haven't had very often with video games. It felt in a way like sort of like I played it in VR or whatever. Like I was just sucked into it and I forgot my surroundings and stuff. Because the music and the environmental noises and stuff, it really captured me. And like it's also because of subtle details like the visor of Samus. Like you can see the reflection of Samus in the visor and stuff sometimes when you're hit, and you see like the visor getting wet and stuff with rain. It's subtle details like that that make it so immersive and special. There are so many fun puzzles to solve. To me, when I played it for the first time, it just made me feel like it was like a Zelda dungeon as like an overworld. Like I never imagined that would be a thing. Probably my favorite parts of the Zelda games are the dungeons. Just navigating it and puzzling and backtracking. And then I played Other M and then Metroid Prime and Super Metroid, and I just never imagined that it could feel like one giant Zelda dungeon, And it's so cleverly designed. How can you make like an entire world's worth of a Zelda dungeon, basically? How do you do that? It's so creative and cleverly designed. So maybe there's some bias there that like Other M and Metroid Prime were my first two Metroid games, and that's why they're so high. But I feel like those ones and Super Metroid are the pinnacle of Metroid, though, in my opinion. Obviously, like Super Metroid or whatever isn't very Zelda-like, I guess, because it's a 2D side scroller. But the Metroid Prime games, they really feel like a 3D Zelda dungeon, like one giant, massive. And I would say that's also why probably Metroid Prime 3 is not number one on the list because it's not one entire world. Uh, Metroid Prime 3 is basically like going from dungeon to dungeon in a Zelda game, which is also very fun. It's number 3 on the list, but I would still prefer it to be Metroid Prime 1. Just having one giant world. I would even say that Metroid Prime 1 is an open world game. And I think there's a difference with a sandbox game. A sandbox game is like one giant area that you can't get out of, and there's a bunch of things to do, and it's non-linear. But I don't think open world is the same thing. I think open world is just one giant connected world, and it doesn't really matter that there's loading screens in between. That doesn't not make it an open world game, in my opinion. In my opinion, Metroid Prime One is an open world game, and I would say it's my favorite open world game. I generally don't like open world games because they can get very sandboxy, and I always just feel like if you make a giant world, I would love to have backtracking in it, and that's why I love and enjoy Metroid so much because I love backtracking. And like Zelda Breath of the Wild, for example, it doesn't really have backtracking, so it's not my type of open world. But I don't think it not having backtracking is required for an open world. I think you can make an open world game that has backtracking. So yeah, I would love to see more games like Metroid Prime. Recently, there was like a game on Xbox Game Pass that was supposed to be a 3D Metroidvania game and wasn't very fun. So I've never really played anything like Metroid Prime before, uh, besides Metroid Prime itself, and that's unfortunate in my opinion. Yeah, and even Zelda, I love Zelda, but it isn't really. Well, Zelda Skyward Sword I love because of that. It has a lot of backtracking, also a lot of big worlds. Zelda is pretty much a Metroidvania game. Zelda Skyward Sword, I mean. Other than that, there aren't really any 3D Metroidvanias as far as I know. Please let me know in the comments if there are some. I'd love to check them out. But as far as I know, there's not really anything like Metroid Prime, and that's exactly why it's number one because it's so unique. It's definitely in my top five favorite games ever. I would say F-Zero GX on the GameCube is my favorite, and then some maybe Zelda Skyward Sword or some of the Super Smash Bros. Games and Mario Sunshine, and then Metroid Prime. Some of those are number two. You could argue that Metroid Prime is my favorite game, or at least top three. It's a very, very special game, and it was really immersive. I got completely lost in it and forgot my surroundings and everything, and I think that's just super special. Very vivid memories too of it, because usually I'm very forgetful and my memory is kind of blurry, but with Metroid Prime, I just vividly remember playing it, and it didn't even feel like being in a room anymore. It felt like I'm Samus and I'm playing the game. I guess that's how every game feels little, but especially with Metroid Prime, they really I don't know how they do it, but they nail that. Well, because of the immersive details, like I said. Yeah, I guess that's it. That because I could talk about Metroid Prime forever. Let's just recap a little bit. At number 14, I have Federation Force. At 13, the original Metroid. At 12, Fusion. At 11, Prime Pinball. At 10, Prime Hunters. At 9, Dread. At 8, Metroid 2 or AMTR. At 7, Prime 2. At 6, Zero Mission. At 5, Samus Returns. At 4, Other M. At 3, Prime 3. And at 2, Super Metroid. And then at 1, Metroid Prime.